These are the best first luxury watches to buy in 2026. Every one of them is under $10,000. And at least two of them, serious collectors, are too embarrassed to admit they don't own them yet. Number 5. Shin 556i. There's a watch brand in Frankfurt that has never run a single celebrity campaign, no ambassador with a yacht, no movie placement, no limited edition collaboration with a streetwear label to keep the content feed moving. Just a catalog so dry to read, it might actually be the most honest document in the watch industry. Shin doesn't sell you a story, they sell you a specification sheet. The 556i is 38.5 millimeters of satinized steel. Black dial, no date, no complications, nothing competing for your attention. A sapphire crystal sits flat on top. 200 meters of water resistance, which is more than you'll ever use on a commute or in a boardroom, but it's there because Shin built this watch to outlive its owner. The movement inside is a Sellita SW2001, an honest Swiss automatic at this price point, widely serviceable, reliably durable. It isn't a manufacturer's caliber. Shin doesn't pretend it is. The movement runs, keeps good time, and watchmakers on 4 continents can work on it without ordering parts from a single factory in Le Locle. The watch lands somewhere between $1,600 to $2,000, depending on configuration, and it holds that value stubbornly. Not because it's a grail piece with a waiting list, but because nobody who buys a Shin 556 is buying it for the story. They're buying it because they researched every alternative and decided they don't need to perform enthusiasm for strangers. That buyer doesn't panic sell. They don't list it 3 months later because a shinier reference appeared. I know someone who wore one of these for 8 years as his only watch. Mid-level banker, constant travel, mixed time zones, salt water on holidays, airport security, client dinners, weekend hikes. The watch went through all of it. When he finally sold, he recovered within $15 of the original price, then bought another one. Same reference. He said losing the first one felt like losing a tool that simply worked, and he'd made a mistake by selling it at all. There's a kind of dignity in a watch that makes no claim on your identity. No one at a dinner table has ever looked at a Shin on someone's wrist and made a fast assumption about them. That's either the worst thing about the brand or the best thing, depending on why you wear watches. But I will be straight with you. This watch has a real weakness, and I'm not going to skip past it. Secondary market liquidity is thin here, not because the watch loses value quickly. It barely does. But because people who own Shin watches tend not to sell them, transaction volume is low. If you need to convert it fast, you might wait a while. And for a first luxury watch purchase, that matters. The Shin 556i is not an investment. It's the best tool on this list. Those are two different things, and only you know which one you actually need. What I keep coming back to, whenever I think about this price tier, is that the Shin asks nothing of you emotionally. Every other watch on this list is, in some way, asking you to buy into a narrative. The Shin is just asking whether you'd like a very good watch. If the answer is yes, here it is. If you need more than that from a watch, this isn't your watch. And the brand knows it. They seem fine with that. One last thing about the movement situation. A common knock on the Shin in collector forums is that the Sellita SW2001 is just a workhorse movement. That framing gets the priority backwards. The SW2001 is a direct descendant of the ETA 2824-2, one of the most produced and serviced movements in the history of Swiss watchmaking. Calling it just a workhorse is like calling a Land Cruiser just a truck. Yes, that's the point. That's the watch for the person who's already done deciding. But most first-time buyers aren't there yet, and the next one is for them. Number 4. Longines Spirit 37mm, Cal, L888, 4. Longines is one of the oldest, continuously operating watch brands in existence. Founded in 1832 in Saint-Imier, in the Swiss Jura, they built movements for Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic navigation instruments, Olympic timing equipment, expedition watches for people crossing deserts and glaciers without GPS. For decades, 5 applied stars on a dial meant something to people who understood movements. The watch had passed COSC chronometer certification. Longines earned that symbol before most of the brands people argue about on forums today even existed. Then, somewhere across the 90s and early 2000s, Longines became the brand in the airport duty-free case between the perfume and the keychains. Accessible pricing, fashion collaborations, the horological equivalent of a good university that expanded enrollment so aggressively that the degree started meaning less. Serious collectors quietly wrote them off. That was a mistake they're correcting, one spirit at a time. The Spirit Collection is what happens when Longines stops apologizing for its heritage and starts using it. The 37mm version is the specific size I want to discuss, because it's generated the most interesting conversation and the most confused marketing from Longines themselves. They initially pitched the 37mm to women's watch buyers, which is roughly equivalent to Porsche marketing a 911 as a family vehicle. The 37mm sits at a diameter that works beautifully on most wrists, without caveats. It's 11.7mm thin. The bezel is stepped, inspired by vintage aviation instrument cases, and it catches light at angles that printed markers simply can't. Applied indices throughout. The kind of case finishing that, on a different dial, at a different brand, would command twice the asking price. Inside is the Caliber L888-4. Here's the disclosure most reviewers skip entirely. The L888-4 is developed over the ETA, a 31, L11 architecture. ETA is a movement manufacturer and part of the Swatch Group, which is the same parent company that owns Longines. So, this is not a movement conceived from nothing. What Longines actually did with that base, fitted a silicone hairspring, extended the power reserve to 72 hours, and submitted the complete movement to COSC for chronometer certification. The official Swiss Chronometer Testing Institute requires performance within -4 to +6 seconds per day, across 5 positions, across 2 temperature ranges, for 16 days consecutively. Many movements at twice the price don't bother submitting. A silicone hairspring matters in practice. Silicone doesn't rust. It doesn't respond to magnetic fields. Your phone sitting next to the watch on a nightstand, your laptop open beside it, the security scanner at the airport. None of that will affect the movement's accuracy. And because Longines extended their manufacturer's warranty to 5 years on every watch carrying a silicone balance spring, you have formal confidence from the manufacturer. 5 years. Most Swiss watch brands offer 2. Retail sits around $2,100 on a leather strap, closer to $2,500 on the steel bracelet. Used examples in complete condition have been trading between $1,700 and $2,200 on the secondary market. That's your entry point for a COSC certified, silicone-springed chronometer with a 72-hour power reserve, which you'd expect to find on watches approaching $4,000 from brands with larger marketing budgets. The collector community's relationship with this watch is what interests me most. Reviewers on WatchCrunch, who own it, tend to sound almost sheepish about how much they like it, like they're admitting something slightly embarrassing. One review, posted in September 2024, described it as quiet confidence, and noted it had been worn non-stop since purchase. That phrase is actually precise. This watch doesn't announce itself. In a hobby where people measure credibility by how unattainable a reference is, the Spirit 37mm is the opposite. Attainable, honest, and technically better than its reputation suggests. The L888-4's power reserve of 72 hours means you can put it down Friday evening and pick it up Monday morning, and it's still running. That's not a cosmetic detail. It changes the practical experience of owning an automatic watch. The COSC certification, which uses a silicone spring in the oscillator, means it will maintain that accuracy in the real world, not just in a testing chamber. So, where does it fall short? Design prestige is the honest answer. Mention a Longines Spirit at a serious watch gathering, and nobody leans forward. The secondary liquidity is real but moderate. Some collectors will never fully accept the ETA foundation, and that's a coherent position, even if I don't share it. And Longines themselves seem ambivalent about who this watch is for, which shows in the marketing, which hasn't helped the watch find its audience as quickly as it deserves to. Buy one pre-owned with the steel bracelet. Wear it for 6 months. If you feel the same way at the end of 6 months as you did on day 1, you haven't bought a watch. You've found one. There's also a forum argument worth addressing here directly. Some collectors will tell you that the L888-4 isn't truly a Longines movement, because it's based on an ETA movement. By that standard, Half the most celebrated Swiss automatics of the 20th century are disqualified, because the Swiss watch industry has always been a network of shared components, refined at different points in the chain. What Longines added to the ETA Foundation represents real engineering choices, not just badge swapping. The resulting movement, at this price, does things that movements costing twice as much don't bother to do. Dismissing it because of its lineage is the kind of purity argument that makes watch collecting less interesting, not more. Honest engineering is one thing. The next watch makes a completely different argument, and it's been making it since before either of us was born. Number 3. Cartier Tank Must, Ref. WSTA 0041. Louis Cartier drew this case in 1917. He was, apparently, watching military tanks roll across the Western Front and thought the parallel treads looked architecturally interesting on a wrist. That's either one of the great design origin stories in industrial history or the most retroactively polished piece of brand mythology in watchmaking. Probably both. What matters is that the shape worked. A rectangular case with 4 structural brand cards running perpendicular to the lugs, creating the visual effect of a case floating between its extensions. A profile of 6.6 millimeters, a dial that looks like a small architectural drawing, and it kept working for 108 years with almost no revision to the core geometry. That's not nostalgia. That's evidence. The WSTA 0041 is the large stainless steel tank must with a high autonomy quartz movement, silver dial, Roman numerals, blued steel sword hands, a signature cabochon crown set with a blue spinel. The case measures 33.7 by 25.5 millimeters. Because it's rectangular, the diagonal reads longer than you'd expect from those numbers, and it wears larger on the wrist than the spec sheet suggests. Cartier discontinued this reference. That fact shapes everything about why it belongs on this list. When production stops, supply becomes fixed. The watch can no longer be ordered new from a boutique at a listed price. And the WSTA 0041 has something unusual. 2 distinct buyer demographics who want it simultaneously, with almost zero overlap between them. You have the horology-adjacent collector who understands Cartier's history and appreciates the design intelligence of a case that has needed no structural revision in over a century. And you have the fashion-forward buyer who has seen this silhouette on every wrist worth photographing since the 1970s. Andy Warhol, Princess Diana, virtually every magazine cover that needed something to communicate taste without explanation. Both of those demographics want the same watch, and they pull from the same supply. Most watches at this price point survive on one audience. This one has 2. That's an underappreciated structural fact about where this reference sits in the market. The numbers are specific. Watch Charts recorded 22 individual transactions on the WSTA 0041 in November 2025 alone, placing it in the top 2% of Cartier watches by monthly volume. Median days to sale on that platform: 26.5 days, faster than 93% of all watches tracked. Secondary market prices run from $2,600 to $4,000, depending on condition and completeness, with full-set mint examples clustering around $3,200. The original retail before discontinuation was around $3,400. The secondary market hasn't significantly cratered from that number, which, for a quartz watch in a market that often punishes quartz, is notable. The quartz movement will bother some people who end up here from the mechanical side of the hobby. I want to take that seriously rather than dismiss it. A battery-powered watch does feel philosophically misaligned with a hobby built around the craftsmanship of mechanical movements. That feeling isn't irrational. But here's the material reality. The tank must's value has never lived inside its case. It lives in its case shape. The geometry is the watch. The movement is the mechanism that keeps the hands indicating the correct time, while the real transaction, the visual and cultural one, happens on the outside. And a high-autonomy quartz does that job with a level of precision, reliability, and low maintenance that a mechanical movement at this price point can't match. Nobody has ever looked at a tank must on someone's wrist and thought about what's running inside it. They've thought about 108 years of visual meaning loaded into that silhouette. The movement is invisible. The case is everything. I'll admit something. I keep returning to this watch as the strangest value proposition on the list. Not the most technically impressive, not the most reliable, but the one that does something no other watch here does. It tells people you have taste without them knowing you told them anything. That's a rare capability at $3,000. What it doesn't deliver: any window into mechanical watchmaking. If you're buying a first watch partly to understand how a movement works, the tank must points in the wrong direction. Buy the Longines, or the Omega for that. Buy this one because you've understood everything it is and decided that it's exactly what you want. The tank has been making that case since before most countries had television. The next one builds its argument differently, in a laboratory, with independent test data attached. Number 2. Omega Seamaster Aquaterra, 38mm, Cal, 8800. Omega has a James Bond problem. Not the kind you'd expect. The problem isn't the association itself. That's been commercially valuable since 1995. The problem is that James Bond's watch has calcified into a specific silhouette in most people's heads. The Seamaster Diver, 300M, large case, rotating bezel, and heavy bracelet. Every discussion of Omega at this price tier gravitates toward that model, which means the one sitting quietly to its left in the display case, at roughly the same money and with a more sophisticated movement specification, almost never gets the conversation it deserves. The Aquaterra 38mm runs the caliber 8800. This isn't just a COSC chronometer, which is already a meaningful credential. It's a master chronometer, carrying independent certification from METAS in addition to the COSC standard. METAS testing covers things COSC doesn't, including one specific test I want to focus on: magnetic resistance to 15,000 Gauss. Here's why that number matters. A standard household blender generates a magnetic field of around 50 Gauss. A laptop computer costs closer to 200. An airport security scanner operates around 1,000. A hospital MRI machine runs between 15,000 and 30,000 Gauss. The 8800 is certified functional through the lower end of that MRI range. You will encounter essentially nothing in normal daily life that challenges this movement's accuracy. And that magnetic resistance is achieved without a soft iron cage inside the case, which would make the watch thicker and heavier. The architecture of the movement itself resists magnetic fields. That's a different engineering choice, and a more elegant one. In META's master chronometer trim, the 8800 is accurate to +0 or -2 seconds per day, tighter than COSC's standard of -4 to +6. Omega fitted the movement with a silicon balance spring and coaxial escapement with bidirectional winding. The power reserve is 55 hours. The movement was designed to require less frequent servicing than conventional Swiss automatics, with longer intervals between full services. Retail on the standard stainless steel 38mm references sits around $6,300 for current production. Pre-owned examples with boxes and papers have been moving on Chrono24 and watch charts in the $4,500 to $6,000 range. Buy pre-owned with the complete kit. The first owner took the depreciation hit at purchase. You don't have to absorb that same loss. The dial runs horizontal stripes across the whole surface, a pattern Omega calls teak concept, referencing the wooden decking of sailing yachts. It's one of those design elements that doesn't photograph well and then looks completely different in person, which is part of why it polarizes people who haven't handled one. Some buyers understand it immediately. Others spend months with the watch before they consciously decide they like it. Both groups tend to keep the watch, which is the more interesting data point. 38mm is the dimension everything here pivots on. It's the size that sits correctly on a smaller wrist without looking borrowed, and on a larger wrist without reading as conservative. The 41mm version has its arguments and its advocates. The 38mm is the one that disappears onto the wrist correctly, present enough to be seen, proportionate enough that it stops announcing itself after the first week. Here's where I want to be honest about the liquidity picture. Omega's production volumes are high, which means the pre-owned market has sustained supply. That prevents prices from running far above retail, but it also means the floor is held by genuine demand rather than artificial scarcity. You can almost certainly move a clean 38mm Aquaterra in a reasonable window. Not in 26 days like the tank must, but not in 6 months either. Collector forums describe this as the watch people stop justifying to other watch people once they decide they don't care what other watch people think. I've seen it called the Gada watch across Watch You Seek, Fratello, and half a dozen other communities, which is either faint praise or the highest compliment you can give a $6,000 timepiece, depending on your philosophy. I think it's the highest compliment. A watch that doesn't need a different one for any situation you'll actually encounter is rare. Most watches are better than nothing, and worse than something else in specific moments. The Aquaterra is better than most things in most situations, and it costs less than the something else would. The Aquaterra earns its place for what it delivers across the board. But the watch coming next earns its place for what it represents at a structural level, and that's a harder thing to quantify and more important to understand early. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 1. Tudor Black Bay 5.8 Ref M79030N. Let me describe a scene that plays out in authorized dealer showrooms around the world every day. Someone walks in and asks for a Rolex Submariner. The salesperson smiles, gets out a list, and explains that some customers are still waiting from 2 years ago, some longer. The Submariner date retails at just under $11,000. On the secondary market, it trades somewhere between $14,000 and $18,000, depending on the day and the reference. You're not buying a watch. You're applying for one and then paying a premium on top of the privilege of having been accepted. Now, consider crossing the street. Tudor is Rolex's sister brand, controlled by the same Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. Sharing the same local manufacturing culture, the same industrial discipline, the same obsessive quality control infrastructure. In February 2026, Tudor opened the doors of their Knissi movement facility to journalists for what appears to be the first substantive access in the brand's history. What they showed was not a manufacturing story that needed dressing up. RFID-tagged movement holders tracking every caliber through assembly in real time. Atomic clocks at the COSC facility down the road, serving as benchmarks for certification testing. A Knissi stated failure rate on movements submitted to COSC of under 3%, with essentially a 100% pass rate on resubmission. That's engineering discipline, not marketing language. You can't fake that number. The COSC data is independent. The movement in the Black Bay 58, the caliber MT5402, comes from that facility, 27 joules, silicon hairspring. Free-sprung variable inertia balance, which means rate adjustments don't require reopening the movement because stability is built into the geometry of the oscillator itself. 70-hour power reserve, COSC certified. The complete movement is 26 millimeters in diameter, purpose-built for the 58's slim case profile, which is why the watch wears under 12 millimeters thick. The case is 39 millimeters. The dial references vintage Tudor dive watches from the 1950s. Gilt printing, snowflake hands, a minute track that looks like it was pulled from another era rather than designed for this one. The aluminum bezel clicks with the specific tactile quality of a watch engineered rather than assembled. 200 meters of water resistance, steel bracelet and a fabric NATO strap both included. It wears lighter and slimmer than any of the numbers on a spec sheet would suggest. On Chrono24, unworn 2,026 examples have been trading between $4,300 and $4,700. That's within 2 to 4% of new retail. The watch holds not because speculators are running a position on it, but because organic demand has consistently exceeded available supply since at least 2020. Gray market premiums on the black dial version were documented before the reference became widely discussed in mainstream watch media. This is a watch that found its market before the market was looking for it. Here's the disclosure I want to give you, because you'll encounter it on forums, and I'd rather you hear it clearly. Kenissi, which Tudor co-founded in 2016 and in which the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation holds 80%, also supplies movement architecture to other brands: Chanel, Norqain, Breitling, Tag Heuer, Bell & Ross, and Fortis. Versions closely related to the MT5402 appear in Chanel's J12, 1, and in Norqain's Independence collection. Some collectors treat this as a brand dilution argument. If other brands use the same engine, what exactly are you paying Tudor for? The honest response is ownership. Tudor doesn't license from Kenissi. They own 80% of the factory. They control the specifications, the quality tolerances, the caliber designations, and the finishing. Kenissi wasn't founded to supply the industry. It was founded so Tudor could stop depending on ETA supply agreements that could be revoked. The fact that other brands pay to access that architecture is a validation of what Tudor built, not a dilution of it. Every manufacture movement in the modern Swiss watch industry shares architecture somewhere in the supply chain. What matters is who controls the design and the production. Here, that's Tudor. So why is this watch number 1? It's not the most technically credentialed movement on this list. The Omega 8800 carries both COSC and METIS certifications and has more extensive anti-magnetic performance documentation. It's not the most culturally loaded object here. The Tank Must carries more accumulated room history per gram than anything else on this list. It's not the most capital stable in a thin market. The Shin barely moves. It's number 1 because it's the only watch here that lets you access Rolex family manufacturing infrastructure at a price Rolex itself would never permit. Not because Tudor is a cheap Rolex. That framing misses the entire point. Because Tudor serves a different buyer. Someone who wants the engineering culture, the movement discipline, the quality infrastructure, without 3 years on a list and a secondary market premium that turns a watch purchase into a futures contract. There's an argument in collector communities that Tudor is for people who can't afford a Rolex. I've heard it at watch fairs, from people wearing watches that cost more than a used car. The argument is wrong in a specific, useful way. Tudor was founded separately from Rolex, has always maintained its own design language, and, over the past decade, has built a manufacturing operation that most mid-tier Swiss brands cannot match or replicate. The Black Bay 58 isn't a consolation prize for being priced out of the Submariner. It's a different calculation. The same industrial culture, a movement built specifically for this case, available at retail, without a list, at under $5,000 on the pre-owned market. The collector who understands that distinction early doesn't look back. One final practical note for buyers right now. The burgundy version of the BB58, released in recent years, carries a METIS master chronometer upgrade and Tudor's newer T-Fit clasp. The standard black and navy versions, including the M79030N, use the MT5402 without METIS certification. Both are excellent watches. The black reference is the one with the deepest liquidity and the most consistent secondary market pricing. Box and papers from a vetted dealer, pre-owned or new from an authorized retailer, if you can get allocation without waiting. The gap between new and pre-owned pricing on this reference is small enough that documentation and condition matter more than source. I want to add one thing that doesn't appear in any spec sheet, and that I think matters more for a first purchase than people expect. The Black Bay 58 is sized specifically so that it disappears on the wrist in the right way. 39mm is a dimension that stopped being fashionable for about a decade as watches pushed toward 43 and 44mm, and then quietly became the dimension everyone came back to once they remembered what wearing a watch actually felt like. Under 12mm thick means it slides under a dress shirt cuff without creating a bump. A steel bracelet with a well-engineered folding clasp means it doesn't shift on the wrist during the day. The dial is legible in dim restaurant light. The bezel grip is positive enough to operate without looking at your hand. These are the things you notice after 6 months. They're also the things that determine whether you still want to wear the watch after 6 months. Technical credentials get a watch on a short list. Ergonomics determine whether it stays on the wrist. And here's the thing about the BB58 that I don't see discussed much in the buying guides. Tudor's entire position in the market is structurally unusual, a brand that has actively chosen not to chase collectability, not to manufacture scarcity, not to push secondary market premiums as a proof of status. When you find a BB58 at near retail on the gray market, that's not a sign that something is wrong. It's the brand doing what it says it does, making a good watch available to the person who's done the research and decided it's the right call. In a market full of brands that want to be harder to buy, Tudor wants to be easier to wear. That's a more interesting value proposition than it first appears. Here's what I've noticed. Watching people buy their first serious watch and then sell it 5 years later. The ones who regret the choice almost always bought for status. The ones who don't regret it almost always bought it for fit. Not case diameter, though that matters. Fit in the sense of, does this watch make sense for the life you're actually living? Every watch on this list was built to solve something real. The sin, a tool that nothing in your daily life can kill, no story required. The Longines, a certified movement at an honest price, wearing better than it has any right to at that number. The Tank Must, geometry that has outlasted every trend surrounding it for over a century. The Omega, the most complete single watch on the list, doing everything well without needing to be extraordinary at any one thing. The Tudor, Rolex manufacturing culture, accessible without a waiting list, at a price that treats you like an adult. Pick the problem that matches your life. Then wear it for a year before you decide you need another one. Which one of these is sitting on your shortlist right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know what you're seriously considering and why you're still thinking about it. Like this video and subscribe.